Welcome back to Making It Awkward, a weekly podcast where I, Jessica Wilson, try to make sense of what's happening in food policy, nutrition, and popular culture. You can watch this podcast on Spotify and YouTube. This episode is just the first that I'll be recording on raw milk, not because I find milk particularly interesting, but because of its many branches and intersections. For one, we have collectively experienced a pandemic, and many people came out of that with a stronger value of individualism in their health and less belief in science. There's also a strong willingness to ignore the idea that one could get or spread a virus. For another, there's food safety and population vulnerability. The first time I heard the technical term for bird flu, H5N1, was from a patient of mine. They have long COVID and a list of now chronic conditions and autoimmune disorders that have severely limited their life. They were distraught and confused that people would continue to sell and drink raw milk, and the patient was gearing up for what another pandemic would mean for them, since they weren't ready for the first. And many of us have seen that raw milk influencer culture has started to impact local communities and now policy. Fresno County's raw milk dairy owner, Mark McAfee, who has supplied RFK Jr. with raw milk, has applied to advise the FDA. And if that wasn't wild enough, I was listening to an interview McAfee did with Dr. Paul Saladino, where McAfee mentioned that he was under contract with the FDA to not make any health claims about raw milk. And even that's not all. When talking to my agriculturally educated friends and close acquaintances, we got into conversations about equity and food sovereignty. And now I need at least one episode about government influence on dairy prices and the infamous government cheese. Lastly, at least for now, I want to look at the impacts of the bird flu outbreak on both groups of farm workers and those who are working in dysfunctional and dangerous working conditions in a University of California lab that is testing milk and poultry for bird flu and reporting the cases to government agencies. So, there are many contemporary and historical intersections, so I'm thinking this will simply be take one on raw milk. Okay. Today, let's get into conversations about the safety of raw milk and speak specifically about bird flu. This week, we hit a grim milestone. A patient in Louisiana was the first person in the U.S. to die from bird flu after being hospitalized for the virus. The patient had contact with both their outdoor flock of chickens and wild birds. The patient carried a mutation of the bird flu virus, which the CDC currently guesses mutated in the host, this patient, not before the patient contracted the virus. And I'll note the patient was over 65 and had underlying health conditions, which opens the door to grifters to start selling bird flu prevention supplements to enhance your immune system, just as we saw with COVID, and blaming people who died for not being healthy enough to begin with. And I'm waiting for a holistic bird flu treatment, sold by the same people who drink raw milk. What this means to me, again, is that the most vulnerable people will be most at risk when the population chooses not to take viruses and science seriously. According to the WHO, globally from January 1st, 2003 to November 1st, 2024, 939 cases of human infection with avian influenza, H5N1, were reported from 24 countries. Of these 939 cases, 464 were fatal. As of 2024, there have been a total of 65 reported human cases of bird flu in the U.S. California recently announced a public health emergency for H5N1 to free up more resources, with the virus now spreading to dairy farms beyond the Central Valley and further south. Almost all of the U.S. cases were reported in farm workers who were exposed to infected livestock. Additionally, domestic and big cats who have had access to wild birds, raw milk, or contaminated raw meat have been showing signs and symptoms of bird flu, and many have died. With influencers taking up so much of the airtime with raw milk, I wanted to find someone who actually had cows. Initially, I reached out to two folks who work in agricultural education. One of them, Dr. Jeff Sherman, sent me this voice memo.
Growing up on a dairy, raw milk does taste better, but raw milk wasn't allowed outside of my family for people to drink because it wasn't safe. And the extension service actually got started by going out on trains and telling people about pasteurization and helping people save lives by not drinking raw milk. So it's actually quite dangerous.
And the other person in the group chat connected me with the farmer we'll hear from today. Trampus Harmon is the son of the duo Harmon and Son Beef, in Southern Oregon. Today, Trampus and I talk about his history drinking raw milk and previously having a dairy farm. We chat about whether the social media discourse about raw milk and post-COVID wellness has impacted farmers and rural consumers. Trampus introduced me to the dairy buyback program, which we'll be exploring in later episodes. I get to ask him some listener questions that I gathered from my Instagram stories. At the end of our conversation, I asked him about a TikTok I saw about the term grass-fed beef and how easy it is to be drawn in to compelling videos paired with questionable captions. I'll pop in with that description of the video at an intermission. Trampus, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Can you start by telling us your actual farming history as an actual farmer?
Okay. I grew up on a dairy farm in Southern Oregon here in Grants Pass. I grew up and was raised working on the farm up until I joined the military at 18. And then after retirement, I returned back to the farm and helped out a little bit. And then when my father went into the hospital due to COVID, when it first happened, I sort of stepped up a little bit and have become a partner in the farm. And we have changed and transitioned from dairy to beef. And we now have transitioned from commercial beef to farm to table beef. And we are selling all our beef farm to table here locally in the community.
And how did you transition from dairy to beef in the first place?
So that was actually right before I retired. My father started transitioning from dairy to beef. And so we were AIing, which is artificial insemination, all of our dairy cattle. And so we bought semen that was beef semen and then bred our cows and then kept the beef dairy cross, the start of our herd. And we purchased some commercial beef here locally as well. But that was sort of the start of transitioning from dairy to beef in 2015-16.
Okay. What was the change for?
When you're a dairy farmer, you're married to the farm. You can't leave it. You can't. It's there. If it's -4 on Christmas morning, you have to milk the cows. We had 225 head of cattle. We milked twice a day. And you're constantly there. And as my father aged, he sort of realized, hey, this isn't something I want to do. Beef is a little bit less time consuming, less restrictive of your movement. And so we were able to transition and continue farming while not having to be there 24/7.
Yeah. How many heads of cattle, is that how you say it, do you have right now?
So currently we have around 200 head. And it's going to be calving season here in 2 weeks. And so I'll have another 100 head of babies on the ground. And so we'll go up to 300 at the peak. And then we'll start processing butchering the ones from last year in the summer and fall. And so it fluctuates, but the highest it'll get will 300 and the lowest it'll get will be 200.
Got it. So do you keep the mom cows or do you go buy the calves? Sorry.
Okay, so we are what's called a cow-calf operation.
Okay.
I raise the cows. I have the bulls on site.
Okay.
I have purebred Charolais and Angus bulls.
Yeah.
And we breed our cows and then the calves. So we sell a few commercially into the 4-H kids. And the rest of them we actually raise here locally on the farm to go out to the community.
Fantastic. Were you a 4-H kiddo yourself?
I did, but I had nothing to do with cows because I worked with cows all the time and I hated it.
What did you do in 4-H?
I did pigs.
You did pigs. Okay. Any flower decorating or baking or anything like that?
No, both my sisters did sewing and baking.
Nice.
As well as they did dairy before that. There was a dairy buyback or buyout from the government in 1986, I believe it was. And that actually collapsed the 4-H dairy program here in Josephine County. And so I wasn't able to do a dairy calf and I had no interest in steers or lambs. And so I just did hogs and that was my thing. My grandfather actually built me a hog pen, which I now currently use to raise rabbits. We raise rabbits here on the farm.
Nice.
And it's just one of those things that has continued being used.
What's a dairy buyback?
So the U.S. government decided that there was too much milk in the market.
Okay.
And so what they did is they offered a program where they would buy out a farmer. And I can't give you all the specifics because I was really young at the time. I've read up on it several times since then, but I'll give you some generalizations. So basically they bought out a herd and said you can't farm dairy on this ground for, I think it was 5 years, to help lower the numbers of dairy cattle we have in the United States.
Wow.
And so it worked really great for about 1 year, but then the milk prices went up.
Okay.
And so every dairy that was left bought more cattle.
Mm.
And so after 1 year, and they bought a lot of those cattle that were going out from the other dairies. And so after a year, the numbers were right back where they were. And so it didn't really work.
So there were 5 years when you all weren't actively producing milk?
Oh, no. We didn't do the dairy buyout. A lot of the farms here in Josephine County did, though. And so that sort of collapsed the dairy competition in 4-H. Like there was, growing up, there was, I think, 9 or 10 dairies here in Josephine County, Grants Pass. And now there's like actual commercial dairies. There's Knowles Dairy, who provide all the organic milk for Umpqua.
Yeah.
And there's Rogue Creamery. And there's 3. There's Chewy out at Fort Vanoy Farms. But yeah, there was a lot growing up. And then when the buyback happened, we were one of the few that were left. It was us and Nobles. Rogue Creamery has actually come since then. Chewy has come since then. And so, yeah, it was
interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot of family farms that disappeared because of that.
To be explored. Okay. You grew up drinking raw milk.
Yep.
Did you love it? Is the taste better than pasteurized milk?
Yes.
Tell me more. What makes it great?
Like, I don't, this isn't the correct way to describe it, but this is the way it is in my mind.
Okay.
So there's an off taste to regular or to pasteurized milk. I've drank pasteurized milk since I was 14. My mother had read in an article that raw milk is not good. It was scientifically proven. And so she was like, hey, we're not going to drink raw milk anymore. And so we started purchasing, even though we had dairy cows, we were milking twice a day, 250, I think was the biggest that we got to. We just stopped drinking the milk and we started purchasing it from the store. We purchased pasteurized milk from our own company. So we sold our milk to Dairy Gold, and then we purchased milk from Dairy Gold because it was pasteurized.
Do you know if there's conversation at the time about pasteurizing milk at home, just like boiling it?
No. We never had that conversation. We did skim it in our house. We actually had 2 tanks, and one tank, these were gigantic stainless steel tanks, and one tank settled. And so the cream would rise to the top. And so we would just pull the milk off the bottom because that's where the spout was.
Yeah.
And so it would skim itself and then it would transfer into the big. So if we did it at the right time, we got skim milk at home. But no, we never actually talked about pasteurizing it at home. It just seemed like the thing to do to purchase it from the store.
Sure. Yeah. So did mom know about any pathogens in milk, like until that moment that she learned about it, or do you know?
Our biggest concerns were coccidiosis and E. coli in milk. We were concerned about it. And so that was one of the big things that got us to change from raw to pasteurized.
Totally. Jeff was telling me in a text that he was allowed to drink raw milk when they were kids, but the friends were not allowed.
Exactly. That's exactly true. Even our family that came in, I grew up in a large family. I had 3 aunts and they all had 3 kids each. And so all the cousins and aunts would come. Yeah. My aunts were able to drink the raw milk. My cousins were not, because my aunts had also grown up on it. It can cause some stomach discomfort if you're not used to it. And then, we did all the sanitizing process for before milking, after milking, all that kind of stuff. But the animals are still animals. Yeah.
Right.
So even though you're, flushing everything and doing all this, it's just another safety measure.
Yeah.
In our opinion, it's like, why take that risk?
Like there are germs in the dirt. Like,
Yes.
they're just around. All right. A listener question, speaking of these bugs, is why do you think that, why do people think that raw milk is a healthier option?
So there's a concern that probiotics are being killed off by the pasteurization process, which, from my understanding, humans can't absorb probiotics from an animal. Again, I'm not a scientist. This is just what I've read from, but it is from scientists who I've read this from. So I take a lot of that into account. That is one of the biggest things. They say that it's destroying the vitamins. I don't understand this. Like, where do the vitamins go? Like, if a vitamin is in there and then you heat it up, the vitamin doesn't escape somewhere and go into the air. It's like, I don't get how that happens.
And then it's supposed to have like allergy and all these healing benefits or something as well. I don't know.
I have heard that it heals your gut.
Oh, okay.
I'm suspicious anytime someone uses the term gut in
I think that's fair.
Describing something like that. Growing up, I had a ton of stomach problems. I don't feel like the raw milk healed my gut. You know, my father, my aunts, like we call it the Harmon stomach, which is really scientifically accurate. None of us have had a healthy gut, and we were all drinking, you know, everything we got was from the farm. We raised our own vegetables. We canned our own vegetables. We raised our own meat. So the older dairy cows would then be ground into hamburger when they were past their no longer producing. And so the meat came from our farm. The milk came from our farm. And we still had stomach problems. So I don't see how that's going to heal your gut.
Right. Because in the podcasts and the textbooks and the news, you know, you are the healthiest. You grew up the healthiest of all of the healthy children. And yours is a lifestyle that all of us should aim to have because you were so healthy as a child. And it turns out, maybe that's not universally the case.
It was not. Like,
Yeah.
The healthiest I was when I was in the military, and I had access to fruits and vegetables constantly year round. I lived in Arizona for a while. And so we had fresh fruit constantly because we were right across the Mexican border. And I was in incredible physical shape and healthy at the time. By no means am I a vegan. Like, I was still eating a ton of meat at the time.
Yeah.
But I also, I did purchase, you know, local meat, but that was more because I wanted to support local farmers. I grew up supporting, you know, on a local farm. I wanted to continue supporting local farms.
Yeah. Tastes different, I've heard.
It really does.
Yeah. Totally. Why do you think, well, we mentioned this. Is there anything that you would add to why people might be against pasteurization?
You know, I really think that it has a lot to do with influencers. You know, if I can afford $50,000 in PEDs per month, performance enhancing drugs, like the Liver King was a very, you know, he was an all natural guy and eating testicles and raw. And it's like, oh, this is the only thing I'm doing. And then it came out that he's using $50,000 worth of PEDs per month. But he has sold so many people on this lifestyle. And it really sort of comes down to opinion, what I have for sale.
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%.
Yeah. I mean, the guys that are saying drink raw milk and here's a supplement that will also help you. And the supplement industry is unregulated. Granted, I worked out in the military. I took every unregulated supplement in the world. But I knew what it was. You know, I went in with my eyes wide open and it's like, hey, maybe this is going to work. Maybe it's all placebo effect. But in the end, I never really felt like I swallowed everything that someone said. I always tried to look at it like, maybe this is going to work, maybe not. And I do think that there's a lot of people that are looking for something else to make them healthier.
Yeah.
There's a distrust in the medical community that is astounding to me these days. And so they're looking for, well, maybe if I just drink raw milk, it'll cure whatever's wrong with me, instead of, hey, maybe we don't have a cure for this right now. There's been times in our history we haven't had cures for things, and it happens. I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people I feel that are grasping at straws in order to do that.
Right. And people are making a lot of money from
Yes.
that. Yes, from that vacuum. Do you know how things kicked up recently? I mean, influencers you mentioned, like social media, YouTube, and all of these guys typically, but now increasingly it's moms, it's women. Do you think anything over the past, couple years, or we can say last 4 years, that have made people more interested in these natural, holistic language and things?
Well, so in the beef market, one of the things that is concerning a lot of people is mRNA vaccines. So mRNA vaccines are going to become available to the beef producers. We have not used it. They're not available from my understanding currently, but they are in development right now. And I think that is a concern of a lot of these small businesses, your mom and pop that milks 4 cows out here in their backyard will not use any sort of bad vaccine. And I'm just using that term as what they are in their mind. So I think that is one of the biggest things that I have heard every single week.
Tell me what this means in the concern. My familiarity with the mRNA vaccine is, people now in comments saying that we have had, those of us who have taken COVID vaccines now have brain damage, and that's why we don't believe the new science about raw milk. Those are always fun. But what are the concerns, and how do those come up for you all?
So we sell farm to table. I sell at the growers markets here locally. And so all our beef is sold direct to consumer. I go through a USDA packaging facility, and I have a retail meat license in order to be able to do this. And we sell a grass-fed, grass-finished product. And so I get a lot of people that come up and ask, and that's one of the first questions they ask, are you using mRNA vaccine?
Interesting.
And then they ask me, where can I get raw milk? And I'm like, and I'm not going to lie, I point them in the right direction.
Sure.
I feel like if you want to, you have the right. If you want to know where to go buy a pack of cigarettes, I understand. It's right in the store. However, the biggest issue I have with raw milk is most of the time people that are smoking cigarettes aren't giving cigarettes to their kids. And most of the moms who believe raw milk is the answer aren't endangering themselves. They're endangering their kids as well. And so that's what, I feed my kid raw milk, and I just sort of cringe every time I hear that, because it's like, is that really the best choice? And I don't feel like it is.
I'm willing to wager that you're right, but we'll unfortunately soon find out.
One of the things that I hear a lot is the largest outbreak of E. coli is from pasteurized milk. It's like, yes.
How'd that happen?
That milk was raw right before that. Like, just before the milk was pasteurized, it was raw. They didn't add in the E. coli. It was already present in that milk, and then they didn't heat it to the correct temperature. If you'd bought that milk raw, you still would have had the E. coli virus in there.
That's a really great point.
Yeah, it was due to not pasteurizing it enough. Not the pasteurization product or process is what caused that. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that.
Truly, hearing you say that makes it so simple, but I wouldn't have had that easy of a sentence, like a phrase, just to like refute something in the moment. So I really appreciate that.
I tell people, at heart, I'm still a capitalist. So I don't argue with customers at all. Like, customers come and they ask me, or they feel a certain way. I think it was year before last. There was a large heat wave that went through the South, and it killed a lot of beef. It killed like 10,000 head of beef. And there was a lot of people that were like, the government's doing this. And I'm like, no, this happens. Okay. This happens every year. I've tracked beef numbers. It happens. No, government's doing it. I'm like, no, it was a heat wave. You have full fat cattle, which is a 1,500 pound cow, this black steer, heifer. And so the heat wave comes in every night down south. It gets cool and the heat dissipates from these animals. Well, they had a rainstorm come in And then the humidity caused the heat not to dissipate that night. And so these cattle weren't able to cool down. And so we lost 10,000 head in a night. And down in, I think it was Missouri and Texas, in that area, Oklahoma. That was the only time I ever told people, like, no, stop blaming this on the government. One, you have farmers out here that are hurting, and you're like, oh, hey, it's the government. The government's paying these farmers to kill these animals. I'm like, no,
okay,
not what happens. But most of the time, I don't argue with customers. I have discussions with friends, family, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Back to the mRNA vaccine, because I got sidetracked. People are worried that you're going to, well, actually, what would the vaccine for your cattle be? What would it be?
So we use Shield, 8-way, and a Triangle 10. I don't know off the top of my head what those are.
Okay.
I can look it up in about 2 seconds, but
that's okay.
It's the same vaccine we've used for years.
Okay.
What really surprises people is we've vaccinated for coronavirus in our cattle forever.
Right. Because, yes, it was not new. A coronavirus, yes was not new.
And I have to explain to people, I'm like, all COVID is coronavirus. Not all coronavirus is COVID. Like, right. Our cows don't have COVID. But our cows, like, we actually had a coronavirus outbreak in our herd and lost 25% of our herd. And I explain this to people when they start asking those kind of questions, and they're like, well, why do you vaccinate? Because I have customers that come to me and ask, do I vaccinate? I'm like, yes, I do. They're like, well, I want one that's unvaccinated. Well, I hope you find a producer that is going to do that, because I am not going to do that. I've seen the effects of losing 25%, and it was a lot.
Yeah.
So.
I assume that's very hard. And I want to side note really quickly, because I think a lot of times people feel that farmers are just, like processing this meat through. They don't care about these animals in the first place, and if something bad happens, it's really about the animal and not about, the small farmer. Do you care about your animals?
I tell people, I don't brand my animals. We don't do mechanical castration. We try and work our cattle through our chutes when we do vaccinate without using a cattle prod. My purpose as a farmer, is to put on as much weight on a beef cattle as I can.
Yes.
If I can get 3 pounds per day, that's ideal off of grass. If I stress an animal by branding it, by castrating at a later date, I do band it when they're born. By any additional stress I put on this animal causes them not to gain weight as fast. And so I lose money. I try and not stress my animals. We talk quietly around our animals. We don't want them to startle. They're a 1,500 pound animal. They can be dangerous. I had one kick me in the knee and shatter my kneecap.
No. Yes, I'm sorry.
I had one get me down recently and start beating the crap out of me. And it's like, yeah, you have to be respectful of your animals. You should be respectful of your animals. We love our animals. We really do. Like, calving season is like one of the neatest things ever. And I invite people over all the time. I'm like, hey, come out, see our animals. That's one of the reasons that I think we've grown as fast as we have for our beef is I constantly invite people over because I'm like, look, come look at my animals. Look at the health condition they're in. See the program. See how we're doing rotational grazing and this kind of stuff. The vaccines aren't hurting them. Take a look. And so, and I can show you the vaccines I'm using. I'm not using mRNA vaccines. And I don't think we'll change our program in the future just due to the fact that the success level we are having currently, it seems to be working.
Do you think that the influencer conversation about raw milk has actually trickled down to any like small dairies, or are people advertising themselves differently?
Yes.
Tell me more. I don't know.
So I run a Facebook page, Find Your Farmer in Southern Oregon.
Okay.
It's a group for people to find a local farm.
Sure.
I have several friends that have smaller farms, and I see what they're posting today versus what they've posted in the past.
Okay.
And they're constantly reiterating what I have seen from influencers who are barefoot and shirtless in a grocery store and then they repost that, and it's like, okay. And I wonder how much of it is belief and how much of it is marketing.
Wow. So are these people that you've like grown up with and you think that you've known well, and then all of a sudden they're reposting some woman in her kitchen, or some guy who also happens to be a medical doctor and a carnivore who's talking about okay.
And it's surprising to me on some levels. I feel like I vet what I post. I run a business page on Facebook, on Instagram, and I'm very careful about what I post and who I post from. I try and only post very factual videos, very factual articles. Hey, the cattle numbers are the lowest they've been in 75 years. That's a fact. That's a verifiable fact. Some of the reasons that have led up to it. And, I try and inform my local audience instead of influence them as much.
Yes. Creating, smart people and critical thinkers.
And sort of educating, we used to do dairy tours, and the number of mothers who would ask, well, why do you do all this work instead of just going to the store and buying milk? I tell people that one of the things that I feel COVID did is it really reconnected Americans where their food comes from. They saw food shortages on the shelves for the first since the 60s. And so Americans, and this is my personal opinion, I feel have got away from where does my food come from? Well, there's no longer meat on the shelf. There's no longer milk on the shelf. Well, my neighbor has a dairy, a few cows, a hog, something like that, and they've been selling it. And maybe I should try and contact them and see if I can buy that. And so I do feel like COVID had a fairly large influence on that as well, of where my meat comes from, and pushing people back to the smaller farms.
This may be so this is something that I've thought about and enjoy thinking about. So there's raw milk that some of us 0.1% or however many people think is great. We also sell raw chicken, like other raw meats, raw pork in the store. I don't think most of us are like, yes, because of all the bacteria that is on this pork or this chicken. America is trusted to cook their meats. Where is this disconnect coming from? I don't understand. I just don't understand.
So, okay. Several other countries, including Germany, eat raw pork.
Okay.
It's considered a delicacy there. I've had it.
What'd you think?
It was good.
Okay.
But I don't think I would be comfortable preparing it myself. I trusted the restaurant bar type area where I was at with preparing it. Again, we have, like you said, raw chicken, raw pork. We cook it. Yeah. We know that it has this possibility of having salmonella, but so there's issues that you could have. So you have to cook it to a certain temperature, even
people have meat thermometers.
Yes.
These are things we know.
Yeah. Like I'm cooking some ribeyes right now, and I've got a sous vide. Like I know exactly what temperature I want to do. And I do the same thing with pork and chicken. And it's like, I don't understand why. Yeah. Why is there a disconnect between, hey, we don't eat raw chicken, but we can eat or drink raw milk?
I'm not convinced and not sure.
Have you ever drank it?
Raw milk? No. I also have not had the opportunity. I don't know where I would go to do that. And I'm not going to buy it in a store, let me tell you, because there's too much that can go on from point A to point B. But yeah, if there's a dairy farm, I'll come up there and gamble, I guess. The next time I'm going through there, we can have that as a bonus episode. Jessica tries raw milk.
It is. I mean, it's a gamble. Everything is in life. And so that's why I only get upset about gambling with the kids. Like,
no, it's
I don't feel like you could gamble with the kids. If you want to gamble, I drive a motorcycle.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah. At the same time, I try and mitigate my own risk of wearing a helmet, having the appropriate gear. Yeah.
Brains that are fully developed so you can make decisions.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think as well about, yes, people who are, with chronic diseases or, those who are more likely to get sick if there's even a scant amount of something in raw milk.
A weakened immune system.
Yes.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I feel like those are sort of a vulnerable population because I've heard the carnivore diet cures cancer.
Really, you have?
I have, directly.
All right.
We had, back when we had the dairy, we had a customer that was coming to us and wanted to purchase a dairy cow because they really wanted the bones because they were going to make bone broth because the bone broth is going to cure the cancer. And they passed from cancer.
No, okay. I didn't want to ask that follow-up question, and thank you for providing.
It's a vulnerable population who, if you're reaching the end of your rope, sort of, it's like, well, what else can I do? Well, this guy over here is telling me that, the food industry is what's actually feeding my cancer. And if I change to this carnivore diet, it will starve it because cancer eats sugar. And it's,
You have heard the things. It does.
I have. I've literally heard that from people. And I just sort of, it's not my place to say no.
Right. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm in business in life to be doing.
Yeah.
I sent you the video I sent you.
I'll take a sec to describe this video. It shows what seems to be a large barn in which many white cows with large black spots are eating something that has the structure of hay, to me, but instead is bright green. The green stuff is being dropped into the feeding area by a tractor of some sort. The cows are accessing the food through what seems to be a feeding fence, and perhaps some people could interpret that they are chained to this fence for most of the day. The top of the video from Organic Minded Mom has a large caption that says, "Grass-fed does not mean that cows spend their lives out in the field." It has 19 million views and has been liked by celebrities, a journalist, and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, a new Make America Healthy Again recruit. I emailed the video to Trampus for some context that I figured we would be missing, and he told me via email that the cows may be inside for a lot of reasons. One of the largest would be for weather. You have a 1,300-pound animal that is on hooves, which are super hard on grass at certain times of the year, particularly fall and winter. So if you have a 10,000-pound tractor, especially one with larger tires, it can actually be easier on the ground and prevent compacting of the grazing area. And I got to ask him more about the video during our chat.
So that video to me was a bit misleading.
Yes.
To me, it was looking like these cows are trapped here, even though it says grass-fed. And these are dairy cows also, is what okay.
So dairy cows are not stupid. They can be taught to milk themselves, basically. We're at the point where we have robotic technology. A cow will say, hey, it feels like my udder is full, and they'll walk over into the stall and they'll get milked. They have sensors on their necks. So I can track number 37 has been milked twice today. Like she's supposed to be a minimum of 2 up to 3 times. Hey, number 45, we won't open the stanchion because she's going in. Because every time they go in to get milk, they also get fed grain.
Yeah. Okay. How come?
Because it increases their milk production. It has molasses in it. Molasses is very sweet. And it is a treat to them. And so that causes them, it trains them to come in and milk themselves.
Sure.
And so, that cow is being fed. It's what you're describing in the video is called green chop.
Okay. Let me hear it.
So green chop is hay that has not been dried. Basically, you go out, you chop it, and then you feed it immediately.
Okay.
Drying the hay is so you can store it. If you're going to feed it immediately, you don't have to dry it. It's different equipment, but there's a lot of reasons to do that as opposed to letting your cows out to eat it different times of the year. But that cow is still being fed grain, just not in that video. Like most cows that I know of are still fed grain.
Right.
If they're a milk producing cow. It, like I said, it increases that corn, increases that molasses and soybean and cottonseed are some of the bigger feed they mix in there.
Okay.
Help. produce more milk in that cow.
Interesting. And beef cattle as well could be grass raised and then are finished with grain.
So grass-fed means that a cow has had 50% of their diet has been grass.
Oh.
Grass-finished means that cow has never had grain in their life. And we do not feed grain on our farm. We do not feed grain to anything we sell to our customers.
Got it.
We raise some 4-H calves for my stepdaughter, and she feeds grain. And it goes through, I'm going to say, 2,000 pounds of grain every 3 months.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of grain consumption, and it's for two calves out of 100. But one of the reasons that grass-fed is so popular here in Oregon is we don't live on the Corn Belt. In Iowa and those kind of places where they have the big feedlots, grain is readily available. Corn is really cheap. Corn's, $8 a bushel there. And out here, you're at 16. So you're at double the price because you have to ship all that. And so it's going to increase your costs. And then we have places like Red Bluff, California, that have rolling greenage right now because it's a warmer climate. They get a little bit of rain and it doesn't freeze or snow until like a certain time of year, but they have a longer green season. And so they're able to grass finish their steers down there for, and I use this term loosely, free. We all consider grass free. There's costs associated with it, but you're not having to purchase an outside feed of grain, hay, or something of that nature.
Okay. So
dairy cows, most beef at McDonald's, Taco Bell, Wendy's, that kind of stuff is dairy cow.
Yeah. Tell us more.
At a certain point, a dairy cow will no longer produce. I think that, again, Americans have this ideological view of what happens to this cow afterwards. But you have dairies that are 10,000, 20,000 head of cattle. And so milking 2-3 times a day, these are enormous factory dairies. What happens to those 10,000 cows when they don't produce? Well, they get shipped to the slaughter plant and they get purchased by JBL, and then JBL sells them to McDonald's. That's what happens. Like, that meat in McDonald's is beef, which is just a term for meat from a cow. It's not saying it's a steer or something fancy like you would buy in Safeway, and I use the term fancy again, but it's not what you consider a prime cut of steak. It's something, hey, this is something that is edible, and it can go to McDonald's and Taco Bell and that kind of stuff.
It has amino acids. It came from a cow.
That enough seasoning, you won't even notice it. So yeah.
Hopefully there is seasoning. I'll credit In-N-Out with some seasoning there. Others, not sure. Okay. And then are you lastly worried about bird flu for yourselves?
Yes and no. I don't believe bird flu can be passed through meat. I know it can be passed through milk. So if a cow has bird flu,
yes,
and then you drink milk from that cow, you can get bird flu from that milk. If the cow has bird flu and then you butcher that cow and you eat a steak out of it, I don't believe you can get bird flu. That's why I'm not as worried about it, because it hasn't affected us here in Southern Oregon yet. I do see that it's coming. It's in California, and so it's next door. It's going to happen. Yeah, it is a concern. It's just not an immediate concern because I have a lot of things to worry about.
Sure. Yeah. So is that one of those mRNA vaccine opportunities for flu that people would give their cows? I don't know.
Not yet.
Not yet.
So if you're a farmer and you have 10,000 head of cattle and bird flu is at your neighbor's place and they're going to have to put down these cattle or destroy the milk and basically have zero income because if you destroy that milk. So would I vaccinate my cattle if it would prevent this? Yeah, I don't know any farmer who would not.
Okay.
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they have an mRNA vaccine for it yet. But if it was available, I'm sure that farms would use it. One of the other concerns is RBST, which is bovine somatotropin. It's what causes the cows to put out more milk. Small farms aren't using it, supposedly. There's no way to test for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that I've heard people concerned about. Well, they're injecting hormones into these herds of beef. And so that's why I purchased from a small dairy with the raw milk.
Okay. Anything else that you would like to add or I didn't ask about?
No, I think I covered it. I think we got it.
I think you did a great job. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No problem.
Can I come back to you in the future about farm-related things?
I love talking about cows, so sure.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much to Trampus for coming on the show. I really look forward to having him back and talk about cows. One thing I really want to highlight is his honesty in being a capitalist at heart. And I think that's the same for almost everyone because there are bills that need to be paid. And things cost money. One of the primary selling points for the Maha mouthpieces is that ultra-processed food is food that is made for profit, and that organic fruits and vegetables, grass-fed beef, raw milk, and the hundreds of dollars in supplements we can buy from influencers are made for, quote, public good.
Obviously, ultra-processed foods are generally produced for private profit rather than for public health. So they are engineered to be more rewarding.
I've heard this line time and time again, and each person who says it does so in a way that sounds like they just invented the idea that growing and selling healthy food is just an altruistic means to being in community. And that idea is just simply ridiculous. As I said at the top, there's so much that raw milk connects to, and at some point we'll cover it. Next week, I get to talk with a veterinarian about raw milk and so much more. I reached out to her specifically because I haven't yet heard the Maha troupe talk about how veterinarians get paid by Big Food and Big Pharma. And maybe, just maybe, she'll be heard in a different way. Until then, I hope you make it awkward and that my voice comes back. If you want to support the show, please review it. You can rate it on your podcast platform. You can leave comments on Spotify and YouTube that my dad will end up reading out on the air.
Hi, everyone. I'm doing this solo because Jessica has a cold, feeling very well, and Cole has got a voice all screwed up and everything. But during our episode about flavor, Jessica and I talked about the delicacy of peanuts and Coke on YouTube. Trampus Harmon, who was today's guest, said Coke and peanuts were a treat growing up. Fascinating. He says, I remember when there was no money for treats. So once a week, my dad would split one with me in the summer. And he says it's one of his fondest memories. And a friend of mine, Greg Cartrell, said, great podcast. Thank you. And I would like to thank so much for all the comments, reviewing, and supporting of the shows. Thank you, people, very much. It's much appreciated.
You can join the Patreon community where you'll get behind-the-scenes content, like when Trampus said AI, and I thought he meant robots, not artificial insemination. This podcast is edited and mixed by Jen Jacobs, who does not drink raw milk. It's supported by Patreon members and the legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services. I'm Jessica Wilson, and you've been listening to Making It Awkward.